To understand why Frank Costello was walking into Vito Genovese's trap, you need to understand what had happened to the New York underworld between 1946 and 1957. When Lucky Luciano was deported to Italy in 1946, he left Frank Costello in charge of his family. Frank was the perfect choice. He was smart. He was diplomatic. He had connections with politicians, judges, and police commissioners. Frank didn't rule through violence. He ruled through influence. And for 11 years, from 1946 to 1957, Frank Costello was the most powerful mob boss in New York. But there was a problem. Vito Genovese wanted that power. Vito had been Lucky's underboss in the 1930s. When Lucky went to prison in 1936, Vito expected to take over. Instead, Lucky chose Frank. Vito was furious. He fled to Italy to avoid murder charges and spent the war years seething. When Vito returned to New York in 1945, he found Frank firmly in control. Frank had the loyalty of the soldiers. He had the respect of the other families. He had Lucky's blessing. Vito had nothing. So Vito spent the next 12 years plotting, slowly building alliances, quietly undermining Frank's authority, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came in 1957. Frank had been called to testify before the Kefauver Committee, a Senate investigation into organized crime. Frank's testimony was humiliating. He took the Fifth Amendment 79 times. His face was broadcast on national television. The publicity damaged Frank's carefully cultivated image as a legitimate businessman. Vito saw his opening. He started spreading rumors. Frank's weak. Frank's lost control. Frank's bringing too much heat on the families. And then Vito made his move. He called Frank and asked for a meeting. "Just the two of us," Vito said. "We need to talk about the future." Frank knew it was a trap. Everyone knew it was a trap. Vito's soldiers had been watching Frank's movements for weeks. There had been 3 attempts on Frank's life in the past 6 months, all traced back to Vito. But Frank couldn't refuse the meeting. Refusing would make him look scared. And in the mob, fear was death. So Frank did what he always did when he had a problem. He called Lucky Luciano in Italy. Chapter 1. Lucky's instructions. The phone call happened on April 30th, 1957. Frank Costello called Lucky Luciano's villa in Naples at 3 p.m. New York time, 9 p.m. Italy time. "Lucky, I got a situation. Vito wants to meet. Alone." Frank's voice was tense. Lucky was quiet for a moment. "When?" "Day after tomorrow. His place. No bodyguards. You know it's a trap. Of course it's a trap. But I can't say no. If I refuse, I look weak. And if I look weak, Vito moves against me anyway." Lucky considered this. "You're right. So you go." Frank's voice rose. "You want me to walk into Vito's apartment with no protection? I want you to show him you're not afraid. Fear is what Vito's counting on. He thinks you'll either refuse the meeting or show up with 20 bodyguards. Either way, he wins. If you refuse, you look scared. If you bring guards, you look paranoid. So you go alone. You walk in there like you own the place, and you dare him to make a move. Charlie, if he makes a move, I'm dead. He's not going to make a move, not yet." Lucky's voice was certain. Vito's still building support. He's not ready for a full war. This meeting is about intimidation. He wants to see if you'll crack. You don't crack. You walk in, you sit down. You hear whatever bullshit he has to say. And then you leave. What if I'm wrong? What if he's ready to move? Then you'll be dead. But Frank, you've been dead for 6 months. Vito's been planning this for years. The only way you survive is to call his bluff. Show him you're not afraid. Make him think you know something he doesn't." Frank was silent. Then he asked, "Do I know something he doesn't?" Lucky laughed. "That's the beauty of it. You do now." "What?" Vito thinks he has the commission's support to move against you. He's been telling everyone that the families are tired of your leadership, that the Kefauver hearings brought too much heat, that it's time for new blood. And it's half true. Some families are ready to move on from you, but not all of them, and definitely not the most important one. Who? Me. I still control more of that family than Vito realizes. And I've been making calls, talking to the soldiers, the captains, the guys who matter. Vito thinks he has the numbers, but he's wrong. If he moves against you right now, he'll start a civil war he can't win. So why does he want the meeting? Because he doesn't know I've been making calls. He thinks he can threaten you into retiring, stepping down voluntarily, handing over your territory without a fight. That way, he avoids the war. He gets what he wants. And you get to live, but I don't get to keep my position. No, you don't. Frank's heart sank. So I'm finished either way. Not necessarily. There's a third option. What? You go to the meeting. You listen to Vito's pitch. You tell him you'll think about it, and then you stall. Buy yourself time. Let me keep working the families. In 6 months, maybe I can shift the balance back in your favor. And if you can't, then we revisit this conversation. Frank hung up the phone feeling worse than before. Lucky's plan was essentially surrender with a delay. Chapter 2. Bumpy's Warning. Frank Costello walked into the lobby of the Majestic Apartments at exactly 8 p.m. on May 2nd, 1957. He was alone, as instructed, wearing a dark suit, no weapon, no bodyguards waiting outside. Just Frank and whatever Vito had planned. Frank reached for the elevator button when he felt a hand on his arm. He spun around, ready to fight. But the man holding his arm wasn't one of Vito's soldiers. It was Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was the most powerful black gangster in New York. He controlled Harlem. He ran the numbers. He had connections throughout the city. And he was one of the few men who could move between the Italian families and the black underworld without owing allegiance to anyone. Frank and Bumpy had done business together for years. Mutual respect, shared interests. But they weren't friends. So seeing Bumpy in the lobby of Vito's building was shocking. "Mr. Costello," Bumpy said quietly, "we need to talk." "Not now, Bumpy. I have a meeting, I know. That's why I'm here." Bumpy pulled Frank aside, away from the elevator. His voice dropped to a whisper. "There are 4 men upstairs, in Vito's apartment. They're not there for dinner." Frank's stomach tightened. "How do you know?" "Because one of them is my cousin's husband. He told his wife this morning he had a job tonight. Didn't say what. Just that it was for Vito, and that he'd be paid $50,000. Frank felt the blood drain from his face. 50,000 meant a hit, a big one. Bumpy continued. "Mr. Costello, Lucky told you this was a negotiation. But Vito changed the plan. He's not negotiating tonight. He's ending it." "How do you know what Lucky told me?" Bumpy smiled slightly. "Because Lucky called me 3 hours ago, asked me to watch your back. Said you'd be walking into that lobby at 8 p.m., said I should make sure you walked out again." Frank stared at Bumpy. "Lucky sent you? Lucky's been making more calls than you know. You think he's just been working the Italian families?" "He's been working everyone, including me." Bumpy leaned closer. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk up to that apartment. You're going to knock on the door. Vito's going to open it. And you're going to see those 4 men sitting in his living room, guns out, ready. And what am I supposed to do? You're going to look at Vito and say exactly these words. 'Lucky sends his regards.' And then you're going to turn around and walk away." Frank shook his head. "If I walk away, I look like a coward. Vito wins. If you walk in, you're dead. Vito still wins. But if you walk away, after saying Lucky's name, You plant a seed of doubt. Vito doesn't know how much Lucky knows. He doesn't know who Lucky's been talking to. He doesn't know if Lucky's 2 steps ahead of him. That doubt buys you time. Frank considered this. Then he asked, "What if Vito shoots me in the back?" "Then I shoot Vito." Bumpy opened his coat slightly. Frank saw the gun. "I'm standing right here. Vito touches you, he's dead. And his 4 shooters know that. They're not taking a bullet for Vito tonight. Not when Bumpy Johnson's in the lobby." Frank felt a wave of relief, but also confusion. "Why are you doing this? Why risk yourself for me?" Bumpy's expression was serious. "Because Lucky Luciano asked me to. And because you and I both know that if Vito takes over, Harlem suffers. Vito doesn't respect the boundaries, doesn't respect the deals we've made. You've kept the peace between us for 10 years. I owe you for that. And because Lucky's paying me $50,000, same amount Vito's paying his shooters, Lucky's making this worth everyone's time." Frank almost laughed. "That's Lucky, always a businessman." Bumpy stepped back. "Go upstairs, Mr. Costello. Say your line, then come back down. I'll be here." Frank took a deep breath and pressed the elevator button. Chapter 3. The Apartment. Frank Costello rode the elevator to the 7th floor. His heart was pounding. His hands had stopped shaking. Bumpy's words had given him something he didn't have before. Confidence, a plan. Frank walked down the hallway to apartment 7D. He knocked. 3 sharp knocks. Vito Genovese opened the door. He was smiling. A predator's smile. "Frank, come in. We have much to discuss." Frank stepped inside and immediately saw what Bumpy had warned him about. 4 men sitting in Vito's living room. All of them had their jackets open. All of them had guns visible on their hips. They weren't even trying to hide it. Vito gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Frank didn't sit. He looked at Vito, looked at the 4 men, looked back at Vito. And then Frank said the 4 words Bumpy had given him. "Lucky sends his regards." The room went silent. Vito's smile faltered. The 4 men shifted uncomfortably. Frank continued. "You know, Vito, it's funny. I talked to Lucky this morning. He told me you'd been busy, making calls, building alliances, planning your move." Vito's face went pale. "He knows everything, Vito. Every call you've made, every promise, every lie. And he wanted me to give you a message." Frank took a step closer to Vito. "The message is this. You make your move tonight, and Lucky makes his move tomorrow. And his move is bigger than yours." Vito found his voice. "Lucky's in Italy. He can't touch me." "Can't he?" Frank smiled. "How many of your soldiers have family in Sicily? How many have connections in Italy? How many would pick up the phone if Lucky called and told them to switch sides?" Vito's expression darkened. "This is my family. Not anymore. It's Lucky's family. It's always been Lucky's family. You were just keeping the seat warm. And now Lucky's decided you've been sitting in it too long." Frank turned and walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Oh, and Vito? One more thing. The 4 guys you've got sitting here, one of them is related to Bumpy Johnson. And Bumpy's downstairs right now, waiting for me. So if anything happens to me in this hallway, Bumpy comes up here. And these 4 guys, they're not stupid enough to die for you tonight." Frank opened the door and walked out. He didn't run, didn't look back, just walked calmly to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. Behind him, he heard Vito's door slam shut. No gunshots, no footsteps, just silence. The elevator arrived. Frank stepped inside, the doors closed, and Frank Costello let out the breath he'd been holding for the past 10 minutes. Chapter 4. The Lobby. Bumpy Johnson was waiting in the lobby exactly where Frank had left him. Frank walked up to him. "That was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life." "You did good, Mr. Costello. Frank shook his head. I don't know how Lucky knew. How he knew Vito would change the plan. How he knew I'd need backup. How he knew to call you. Bumpy smiled. That's why Lucky's lucky. He thinks 3 moves ahead, always. Frank extended his hand. Thank you for being here. Bumpy shook it. Just doing my job. The 2 men walked out of the building together. Once they were on the street, Frank asked, What happens now? Now you go home. You lay low for a few months. You let Lucky keep working the families, and eventually, Vito makes his move. Because Vito's too proud to stop now. But when he makes his move, Frank met Bumpy's eyes. He loses. Because Lucky's been building a wall around you, and Vito's going to run right into it. Frank Costello went home that night, alive. 3 weeks later, on May 24th, 1957, one of Vito's men shot Frank in the head outside his apartment building. The bullet grazed Frank's scalp an inch lower, and he'd be dead. But Frank survived. And after that shooting, Frank did something that shocked everyone. He retired, stepped down voluntarily, told the commission he was done. Vito Genovese finally got what he wanted. He took over Frank's family, became the boss. But the victory was hollow, because Lucky had spent those months poisoning the well, turning soldiers against Vito, building a case with federal prosecutors. And in 1959, just 2 years after Vito took over, he was convicted of heroin trafficking, sentenced to 15 years. Vito died in prison in 1969. He was 71 years old. He spent his final years bitter and alone, convinced that Lucky Luciano had destroyed him from across an ocean. He was right. Frank Costello lived until 1973. He died in his bed at age 82, natural causes, surrounded by family. And at his funeral, there was a wreath from Bumpy Johnson, with a note that said, For the man who knew when to walk away. Frank Costello walked into Vito Genovese's trap on May 2, 1957. But because of Lucky Luciano's planning and Bumpy Johnson's warning, Frank walked out alive. And the 4 words Bumpy whispered, Lucky sends his regards, weren't just a warning to Frank. They were a message to Vito, a message that said Lucky was still in control, even from Italy, even in exile. Lucky Luciano proved that night that real power doesn't require your physical presence. It just requires people who will answer when you call. And Lucky had people everywhere, including Bumpy Johnson, standing in a lobby, waiting to save Frank Costello's life.